What's up, gamers? I'm Travis Britton, and I just toured the Houston Museum of Natural Science here in Sugar Land. And while I was there, something caught my eye. As a gamer myself, I'm familiar with the term salty, which roughly equates to being upset that you lost. I've been salty a fair bit myself, but as I toured the museum, what drew my eye was the museum's exhibit on salt. Today, I'll be your guide on this salty exploration through the world of salt production, its uses, and differences in the different types of salt. First, let's talk about the different types of salt. There are three different types of salt currently being sold in the world for consumption: kosher salt, sea salt, and modern day table salt. Kosher salt is dense, often plate like in structure, and is often larger than the two other salts. It's usually sold without additives such as iodine, and is typically used more in the cooking process than at the table. Sea salt is harvested through the evaporation of seawater and taking in the leftover salt. It usually has traces of minerals that add to the taste. Sea salt's shape is often irregular and undefined, and it can be either very coarse or very fine, or anywhere in between. Table salt is harvested from salt mines. It's cube-shaped and often densely packed together. Most of the trace minerals have been removed through refinement, and the type as table salt can contain iodine or it can be plain. Next, the museum had an exhibit showing the similarities between the creation of a salt dome and lava lamps. Some background info on lava lamps is that the lava in them is actually a form of wax, with an additive that makes the wax a little too dense to float in the water. When the wax is heated up by a heat source in the bottom of the lamp, the wax then drifts towards the top of the lamp, and then as it cools, it floats back down to the bottom. Now, how does this relate to salt? Salt domes are formed when the Earth's internal heat warms the salt so it becomes less dense and floats to the top, like the lava lamp in the analogy. Salt was a lot more valuable a long time ago than it was today. This is because without modern refrigeration, food wouldn't keep for nearly as long, especially meats. But by covering the meat in salt, a person was able to preserve food for a much longer time. Salt was also used in some places as a form of currency, as depicted by the salt brick that was shown to me at the museum. Another reason salt is valuable because of the roles that it plays in making our muscles function. Without getting too much into the science behind it, our muscles need both sodium and potassium to be able to move, and we burn some of our sodium when we exercise through the form of sweat. This is why sports drinks contain sodium, so athletes can keep performing at a higher level for longer periods of time. The next section of the museum I went was their most interactive. They had a door into an exhibit that showed what it was like to be in a salt mine in the 1800s. When you were entering in the exhibit, there was a warning sign that said report any dangerous conditions to your foreman. Signs like this in a narrow hallway helped to set the mood and made it feel like I was actually entering into a mine shaft. This exhibit was called Bringing a Little Salt to the Land of Sugar, and it informed me of the plethora of active and inactive salt mines in the Texas area. The next part of the exhibit showed early safety practices that were done in the mine, specifically tag boards. The safety of the mining personnel was of a high concern, so they developed a system of determining whether someone was inside the mine or not. There's a series of tags given to every miner, and they were to put one tag on the board at the top of the mine before they descended down to the bottom. The person would also keep a copy of the tag on them. This would let those in charge of the mines know if there's a person down at the bottom. As technology advanced, so did these tag boards, with modern tags being electronic for better determining of a miner's location. The surface tag board was also lockable now to help prevent accidental tag movement. These practices stood the test of time and are still used today by modern mining companies. Conditions in the salt mines were rough and often required hard labor. As a result, it was mainly poorer men and former slaves that worked in these salt mines. Temperatures also increased the further you went down in the mine. People also had to worry about dehydration because being exposed to that much sodium can dry out a person's skin and absorb most of the water inside them. With the advent of modern mining equipment, salt mines became one of the safest types of mines to work in. To enter a salt mine, miners go down a shaft from the Earth's surface into the salt bed. There are usually two shafts in each mine, one for personnel and one to lower materials and equipment into the mine, as well as to hoist the mine's salt rock back to the surface. These shafts are also used to deliver a constant supply of fresh air to the miners while they work hundreds to thousands of feet below the surface. Next, I'll talk a little bit about the mining process. Salt is mined using the room and pillar method. The salt is removed in a checkerboard-like pattern to leave solid and permanent pillars to help support the mine's roof. Usually about 45 to 65% of the total salt is removed from the room. The rooms average about 18 feet high and usually about 100 feet across. Equipment is then used to load and haul the salt to machines that feed it onto a conveyor belt. These salt lumps are then conveyed to a series of stations for crushing and additional sizing of the salt lumps. The salt is then placed in a storage bin to await hoisting to the surface. The above-ground processing of the rock salt consists of screening the mined salt into various marketable sizes and then sorted mechanically. Once separated, each size is conveyed to its individual storage bin to await packaging or shipment, or loaded in bulk onto railroad cars, trucks, river barges, or lake boats for shipments to customers. The final part of this exhibit was a series of screens that simulated a person's descent down into a mine shaft into a salt mine. It was very realistic for me and even caused me a little bit of motion sickness as I further dived into the mines. This would be the highlight of the salt exhibit, as you could see firsthand how long the descent into the mines was and the actual conditions of the mine themselves. If anybody lives in the Sugar Land area and has a proclivity for the salty, I highly recommend diving into this salt mine. Finally, let's talk about some various salt facts that were posted around the exhibit. For starters, a typical vegetarian diet is often extremely lacking in salt content. Unless salty foods are explicitly sought after and consumed, there can sometimes be extreme medical consequences. Finally, a way I can eat meat without feeling guilty: I'm being healthy. There's an extremely expensive version of salt called Amethyst Bamboo 9X, which sells for almost $400 a pound. It's created by heating up salt in a bamboo pole 9 times at temperatures up to 1,400 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you have about half a grand burning a hole in your pocket, be sure to try some. But for me, I think I'll just stick to the cheaper stuff. In many cultures, salt is used to ward off evil spirits. This is why in certain media that depicts the supernatural, salt is often used to ward off ghosts. In Japan, salt is spread around on stages before performances and before sumo matches by the contestants. This is done to ward off evil spirits that might interfere with the performance or match. The only evil spirits I see interfering in modern sports matches are the refs. Maybe I should try to throw some salt at them, but I digress. With how often salt is used in cooking, one might think that salt is primarily used as an ingredient, but that's often not true. In fact, in the US, most salt is consumed by de-icing the roads to make them drivable during the wintertime. This makes sense when we consider the large amount of highways across the United States that people need to drive on every day to make their daily commutes. Halite, a naturally occurring version of salt, always comes in cube form. In fact, most all table salt that we consume daily takes the form of small cubes, although some rounding may occur during the manufacturing process. Salt was also very influential in the creation of potato chips. A little backstory on how they were invented. There was a cook who kept getting complaints from a customer that his potatoes were too soggy. This cook then grew frustrated and purposely sliced his potatoes very thinly, and he overcooked them and added copious amounts of salt. The chef was hoping to anger this customer, but ironically, they were a huge success with everyone. Going back in time to the American frontier, salt was 4 times the price of beer. And comparing that to modern day, where if I want to get a beer with my meal, it costs about $6. But with better mining techniques, salt became relatively cheaper by a lot. The 13th Dalai Lama, the one we have before the current one, was buried upright on a bed of salt. The Dalai Lama is an important religious and political figure for the Tibetan people, and he has been since the time of the 5th Dalai Lama in the 17th century. The Dalai Lama has been a symbol for unification for the state of Tibet. The Dalai Lama was an important figure of the Gulag tradition, which was dominant in central Tibet, but his religious authority went beyond sectarian boundaries, representing Buddhist values and traditions not tied to a specific school. While a little bit of salt can be good, too much salt can be dangerous and can even result in death. Overconsumption of salt was sometimes used as a means of ritual suicide. This was typically done by the rich in some Asian countries. Finally, in Tibet, salt was compressed into tiny little coins and used as currency. Salt bars were also used as currency in Ethiopia until fairly recently. I hope y'all enjoyed going on this brief tour of the history of salt production in the world and the United States. I hope y'all found this interesting, and maybe now when a recipe calls for kosher salt, we actually know the difference and what it is and how it differs from table salt. And if y'all have a chance, I hope you can come and tour the museum for yourself, as I just highlighted only a small bit of what the museum has to offer. And in conclusion, stay salty, my friends. Thanks for watching.